Rabbi Jeffrey Weil and Cantor Daniel Gale will be officiating service of Mr. Franklin E. Gerber. For those of you who are joining us online, we welcome you. And for those of you who are here, please take a moment to be sure that your cell phones have been turned off. At this time, we're honored to have Rabbi Weil come in online.
Good morning, everyone. We begin with the sacred act of Kriya, which means tearing. I'll ask Frank's sons, Joel, Bill, Aaron, to rise to perform this mitzvah. There's a blessing that goes along with it, which we'll recite in a moment, and you'll repeat after me. And this blessing, before the tearing, acknowledges God as the Dayan Ha'emet, the judge of truth. And it's a curious thing that even during a time like this, and indeed any sad time, that we, when we might doubt God's role in the world and God's purpose in the world, that we refer to God as the Dayan Ha'emet, the true judge. Our tradition nudges us in that direction to try to get us to the point of that acceptance, that things happen under God's providence somehow, even when it's beyond our understanding. In the Bible, when something calamitous would happen, or something shocking would happen, or something sad would happen, our biblical forebears would tear their garments, rend their garments, as if to expose their wounded and vulnerable hearts. And that's the basis of this act of kriya, of tearing. So please repeat, sons of Frank Gerber, repeat these words after me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emet. We say Amen. Blessed are you, eternal our God, ruler of the universe, the true judge. You may perform the tearing now. Thank you. Adonai, ma adam v'teda ehu, ben enosh v'techashvehu, adam lehevel dama, v'mav ketzel over, v'boker tzitz, v'chalaf la'erev, yimalel v'yavesh, tashev enosh adaka v'tomer shuvu b'nei adam. These are the words of the psalmist saying, Adonai, eternal God, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you would even be mindful of us? We're all of us just a breath. We are a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning it shoots up and is renewed, and in the evening of all of our lives, that grass fades and withers. But God, you cause all of us to return unto dust, saying, Shuvu, Bnei Adam, return, O mortal ones. Would that we were wise, and would that we understood whither we go from here. For when we die, we carry nothing with us, not our glory, not our riches. But God, you say, Shmor tam urei yashar, mark the wholehearted, behold the upright. Those are the ones who shall find shalom, who shall find peace. Friends, we gather today, sadly, to remember one who was without question, without any doubt at all, Tam v'yashar. He was wholehearted and upright, and he was kind and compassionate and humble and helpful, a thoroughly decent human being and mensch, Frank Gerber. The first psalm is about living with integrity, a psalm that applies certainly to Frank, living with integrity and to finding delight and satisfaction and fulfillment from Torat Adonai, the Torah and instruction of the Lord. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach be'etzat risha'im u'v'derech hata'im lo amad ובמושב לעצים לא ישב, כי אם בתורת אדוני חפצו, ובתורתו יהגה יומם ולילה. והיה כעץ שתול על פלגי מים, אשר פריו ייתן בעתו, ועליהו לא ייבול, וכל אשר יעשה יצליח. Happy is the person who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat in the seat of the arrogant or the scornful, but rather this person's delight is Torat Adonai, the Torah or the law of the Lord. And in God's law does this person meditate day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by streams of water that brings forth its fruit at the right season. And in whatsoever he does, he shall prosper. The Lord regardeth the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked shall dissipate and perish. The 23rd Psalm we read at this time. I will read it first in Hebrew, and then we will read it together in English. You'll find the English on your handouts. Mizmor David. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot desha yarbitzeni, al meit minuchot yinahaleni nafshi shovev, yanacheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech b'geit salmavet lo irara, ki ata imadi. Shivtecha mishantecha chema yinachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorai, dishanta v'shemen roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirtefuni kol yemei chaya, v'shavti b'veit Adonai l'orach yamim. We read together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The words of Ecclesiastes or Kohelet express the same kind of idea that the blessing for Kriya express, which is that everything unfolds as it should, even when we might be confused by that or confounded by that idea that things are unfolding the way they should. But this is the third chapter of Ecclesiastes, well known from popular song, which discusses the everything having a purpose. L'chol zman ve'et l'chol chefetz tachat hashemayim. To everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot that which is planted, a time to break and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time when we must refrain from our embraces, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time for silence, and a time for speaking. And so this, friends, is an appropriate time to speak words of tribute in memory of Frank Gerber. To serve the Lord, our tradition emphasizes, to serve God, one must serve one's fellow human beings. Frank Gerber fulfilled this this mitzvah gedolah, this greatest of our mitzvot, in the most strong way. Frank served God and his fellow human beings in areas, every arena of his life and throughout his life. And he did so with a quiet and dignified modesty. Frank did bear significant responsibilities professionally, as a synagogue leader, and of course, as a son and a husband and a father, cousin, uncle, and more. And admirably, he never sought the recognition that so many crave. He was uninterested in titles, not interested in honorifics, indifferent to praise. He just wanted to do right and to serve. He was somewhat like Moses in this way. Moses was known as being exceedingly humble. No one more humble than Moses. Frank Gerber was exceedingly humble and exceedingly kind, abundantly modest, and now greatly missed. Franklin Gerber was Chicago born, the only son of parents Ruth and Irving. For a short time, when Frank was a little boy, the family joined cousins, the Sachs family in rural Michigan. But he was a Chicagoan, and that was not the right fit for Irving and Ruth, so they returned with their son to the Great West Side. They lived above their store, Gerber Foods, on Division. As Frank got a little older, he would work in the store. He ultimately went to Roosevelt High School and graduated Roosevelt, and then he went on to earn a bachelor's and a master's studying business. And then he embarked on his very long and fruitful, successful, and fulfilling career with the Chicago Public Schools, working with students with special needs. One day, as a young man, Frank meets this woman, a South Sider, beautiful young woman named Shirley. Both of them shared within them a genuine kindness, a sheer decency. And so they fell in love and they married March 10th, 1963 at the Palmer House. And they began to create their family, welcoming into the world Joel and Aaron and Bill. This family of five lived in Rogers Park, first on Fitch, then Washtenaw. For a while, they lived with an aunt at Estes and Francisco. Wherever they lived, Frank would, who was the senior cousin, at least in the Rabin family, Frank would lead the big family seders. And indeed, for Frank and Shirley, maintaining close relationships with the families on both sides, the Gerber, Rabin, Sachs families, the Eisenstein families, that was a priority. And it was a life for the sons of Frank and Shirley. It was a life surrounded by family, by cousins and more. Frank was also very present for his own family. He was a present husband and a very present father to their sons. He was, between the two parents, the somewhat stricter one, as quiet as Frank could be. And this was a surprise for me to learn about this. As quiet and humble and unassuming as Frank Gerber was, he could sometimes reveal a little bit of a temper. And by the way, that's also like Moses. Moses was exceedingly humble, but he also would on occasion lose his temper. Well, it's not a surprise. He, after all, was raising three very active sons. And when Frank got angry, but again, this was not a commonplace thing, it was rare. But if he got angry and needed to get his boys on the right path or doing the right thing, the boys definitely would learn their lesson. If things would get a little bit too hectic in the house, and I imagine that they could be with a house of three sons, Frank did have an escape, a sanctuary, a haven of sorts. He would head downstairs to his train sanctuary. Frank loved, and perhaps love is too mild a word. Frank had a infatuation with trains and train travel. If a train cannot get him there, he would say, he simply wouldn't go. And so it was. Frank Gerber never once boarded an airplane in his 82 years. But he took these epic train journeys to California with cousin Louis Rabin, to New York for cousin J.B. Sachs's rabbinic ordination, elsewhere to Washington, D.C., to Buffalo with family to visit Aaron, and more. Joel once took me downstairs. This is on Dodge, the house on Dodge, which has been in the family for generations. Joel once took me downstairs to the basement to check out Frank's train sanctuary. It is a very impressive place. It is part workplace, part museum. Yes, there's a great train set, but there's so much more, as well as the to-scale model of the front of the streetcar that Frank assembled from various parts. Very industrious part of his life. Frank Gerber's extracurricular pursuits, besides his work, which we'll get to in a moment, but besides his work and besides the trains, of course, he was deeply, deeply connected to Jewish community and to Judaism. Before the Gerber family joined Ezra Habanim, the Niles Township Jewish congregation, and my goodness, what a fruitful relationship that has been with the Gerber family and our congregation, a very, very positive impact on our congregation. But before they joined us, they were dedicated members of Mikdash El in Evanston. Not merely members, though, leaders. Frank was president of Mikdash El. He was also a Shliach Tzibor. He would lead services on a regular basis. He was the glue. He was truly the glue of that synagogue community. And Shirley, too. Shirley worked in the synagogue office. So our friend Bill Gerber, whom we cherish and love as a friend and colleague, he comes by his career in the synagogue honestly, and his dedication to the Jewish community honestly, taking after his parents. Hatapuach lo nofel rachok min ha'etz. The apple does not fall far from the tree. Frank's deep involvement with Mikdash El and his focus on his train hobby and his dedication to family all existed along with parallel to that long and successful career in education with Chicago Public Schools. He spent his career at Spalding High School. First, he taught business just for a few years, and then he received a promotion and became a guidance counselor, and he was working with special needs students. He was proud of this work. He would come home to his family and speak about these young people with these special needs and about how he would do what he could to reach their fullest potential. It was not a mere job. This 40 plus years in this field, it was no mere job for Frank. It was a calling. For Frank, helping and supporting, that came naturally. After all, he was a generous, gentle spirit. That gentleness abided within him. It was just natural as part of who he was. And while he did not have, nor did he seek great wealth, although he supported the family, of course, but he was generous as can be. He never turned anybody down, and nor did he ever say a negative word about anyone either. And so, friends, there's much to learn from the life of Frank Gerber, how he led this life, how he conducted himself over the course of his 82 years. We will miss him, we all will, but of course we are here to support his mourning family, Joel and Aaron and Bill, and of course beloved daughter-in-law Bessie and grandchildren Jaden, Lucas, and Alex. We know that the last several years have not been so easy for Frank. His disease progressed slowly but surely. Joel was ever present for his father. And the family is also deeply grateful to someone who has really been connected to our Ezra Habanim Niles Township community for many years, and that is Sherry. The Gerber family considers Sherry an angel for the way she cared for Frank. I recall Frank's, I believe it was his 75th birthday party at the synagogue. And there was this montage showing these old pictures of Frank at a time, years when he was healthy and strong, and he was dapper and debonair with that mustache and his cool sports coat and so forth. And yet, even in these later years, although Frank's body was weakened, his spirit remained strong. And during the last 18 months or so, during the pandemic, Frank would be there on Zoom, tuning into our services, listening and watching, and yes, lightly tapping his fingers, faintly singing along to our sacred prayers. And when I visited the Gerber home, I would share news about what was happening at the synagogue, talk a little bit of Torah with him, and it was clear that he was engaged, that he was interested, that he was listening. And when I offered a Mishaberach prayer for him, a healing prayer, he would respond in a whisper, Amen. Frank Gerber, just as he never had a bad word to say about others, no one ever had a bad word to say about Frank. He was a man who did good. He did good in the world. He helped a vulnerable population. He was naturally humble, modest. He was devoted to his tradition. He led his people. He was a man who cultivated a wonderful, wonderful marriage, loving marriage, and who raised loving and grateful sons. He was, Frank Gerber, a good neshama, a good soul. Zichrono livracha. May his memory be for blessing. Amen. It is now my honor to call up the following. You will come up in order. Cousin Frank Sachs, followed by cousin Diane Rosenfeld, and then followed by son Aaron Gerber.
It is my honor today to speak about my first cousin, Franklin Gerber. If you look on the program, you'll notice that it says Franklin E Gerber. To my knowledge, my cousin Frank didn't have a middle name. At some point, and I'm not sure why, he decided that it would be a little bit more distinguished if he had a middle initial at least. So he added the E to his name. Frank simply was a great guy, and there are many facets to his life as an educator, as a Jewish person, as a Jewish leader, as a cousin, as a train enthusiast. Frank was an interesting guy, and he's a great guy, and he was a loving cousin. A couple things that Frank always wanted to have siblings. Unfortunately, my aunt and uncle, Uncle Irving and Aunt Ruth of blessed memory, tried many times, but my aunt suffered numerous miscarriages, and Frank ended up being an only child. So by default, his cousins were, in effect, his brothers and sisters. And my cousin Frank relished that role of being the senior cousin, and he asked us to address him as his distinguished senior cousin. Some of my earliest memories of my cousin Frank are when Frank was getting married. And it was told to me later that as his much younger cousin, and my cousin Louis, who's in the audience today, and my brother, Rabbi J.B. Sachs, we were much younger, and he was told that they shouldn't be invited to the wedding because they're young and they'd run around, they'd cause trouble, and it just wouldn't be a good thing. But my cousin Frank was very, very big on inclusion of all, and especially his cousins, and he demanded that his first cousins, all of them, depending on age, didn't matter, he wanted them there. And I remember his wedding, it's weird, the little things you remember, but I remember the bridesmaids wearing these royal blue dresses, and my grandmother of blessed memory, who he lived with, Chana Sora, wearing some kind of a yellowish dress. And I just remember running around and having a great time. And it was all because of my cousin Frank. My cousin Frank was a person who valued education, and he had multiple degrees, and he actually had at least 30 to 45 hours above a master's. And he was passionate about his role as a teacher, as an educator. And I recall going to a few of graduations, and he was at a school called Spalding High School. And Spalding High School was a school for disabled kids, but it was one of the few, if the only school for people in wheelchairs. And I remember him having me come to some of the graduations where, it was the first time I think I'd ever seen, it's long before, access living and things like that, where you actually saw people in wheelchairs being educated and graduating high school, which had a big effect on me. I remember Frank loving music, and his favorite song was Pomp and Circumstance, Edward Elgar. There's something about graduation that he loved, and I'm not too sure why. But I think, he was proud of his education, he was proud of his accomplishments. He worked hard, he was dedicated, and working in the Chicago Public Schools was, as somebody who's worked there, and a few people in the audience I know that have worked there, it's not an easy task. So he was passionate about being an educator, and I think the best word I can describe my cousin Frank is devoted. He was devoted to his family, his sons. He was devoted to his cousins. He was devoted to his parents. I don't think I've known anybody who cared so much about his parents in particular and was so kind to them and did everything possible to make their lives easier. And I think it's a really, a great tribute to him. It was told to me at one point that he was such a devoted son that there was few, if any, times that there was a disagreement between my Aunt Ruth and Uncle Irving and my cousin Frank. And the only time that I heard that there was a disagreement was when he was planning to go to college. And my aunt and uncle wanted him to go to the University of Illinois in Champaign, which he was accepted, but he didn't want to go. And he ended up, I think, going to the University of Illinois. At that time, I think it was called Circle. And he's also, I think he went to DePaul later on and a couple other schools. But he graduated, I think, with his undergraduate from the University of Illinois Circle. And I think it was because he loved his family so much. And he also loved his grandmother, Chanasora's cooking, and who was a fabulous cook. And I just think for some reason, he just was comfortable, humble, and didn't want to leave his environment. Okay, and I think partly because he loved his parents, he loved his family, and he didn't want to leave, and it worked out okay. So my cousin also, the rabbi mentioned it, but he had this passion for trains, and one of the passions about trains was that if you were to tell him you were going to take a flight, he would give you a pretty stern look, and he wouldn't be very happy. And he would, Frank was a guy that was a real honest guy, and he would, if you did something or said something that he didn't agree with, he would tell you in a quiet, kind way. And so going on a plane was a no-no, and it was better probably not to tell him that you're going to fly. However, before this happened, and I'm thinking about my cousin. I'm thinking about him as a great person, a kind person, a great cousin, our senior cousin, someone that we looked up to, and of course, most of us were a lot shorter than him anyway, but we looked up to him also because of the influence he had, his education, the kindness, and he was all about family. I think, I never really thanked him about inviting me to his wedding. I never really thanked him enough about the number of times that he and Shirley invited us to their home. He was very, very big on family, not only on Passover, which was a very big deal to him. He loved the singing. Even if it was out of tune, it didn't matter. He loved it, and that was a big, big event for him. But just having family over on a regular basis and having that connection, he was all about connection. I wanted to just mention one thing is before this happened on Saturday, I had planned a trip, and I was planning to take a flight out to Rochester, New York to visit my son. and who's in Ithaca. And what happened is that because of connections and things like that, I was maybe going to take a train on the way back, but I decided, as a tribute to my cousin, that I'm going to take an overnight train tonight to Rochester, New York, partly because my cousin would have wanted that. And he would have wanted me to be on a train and to enjoy the experience that he loved so much. And for you, Cousin Frank, this is for you. I love you.
Aaron, Bill, and Joel, thank you so much for allowing me the privilege to speak today about your father and your family. Much of what I'm going to say has already been said. As I drove up to 630 Dodge Avenue in Evanston this past evening to drop off some things for Bill and Joel, the address evoked in me many happy memories of time spent at that address in the past. I am sure that many in this room could say the same thing. I first started going there as a preteen with my parents for a holiday dinner, simcha, or just to visit. I have many vivid memories of Frank's grandmother, Hannah Sari, what a wonderful woman, and his parents, Ruth and Irving, and the hospitality, generosity, and kindness that was extended to all who visited their home. That hospitality and generosity has filtered down and continued throughout the generations. One of the first weddings that I ever attended was Frank and Shirley's, and I was delighted to be included. Throughout the years, I have attended countless Gerber simchas, bar mitzvahs, graduation parties, anniversary parties, to name a few. Frank was several years older than me, and so ahead of me in school. When I was in high school, he would speak to me about his college courses and his desire to become a teacher. I also wanted to follow this career path, so I would listen intently to his advice. After he had been teaching for a few years, I was just starting college, and we would discuss my classes, campus life, and the joys and challenges of teaching. Frank chose to work with special needs children. It takes a very dedicated teacher to work with this population, but Frank had all the qualities needed: patience, love, understanding, a quiet, calm nature, and the ability to connect. He retired after 44 years in education, first as a special ed teacher, and then retiring as case manager and guidance counselor. He truly made a difference in the lives of so many children throughout the years. As was mentioned before, Frank was a devoted son and a wonderful husband and father. And it was already said that he was a leader at Mikdosh El Hagro in Evanston, and I actually heard him daven on several occasions there when there were family simchas going on that weekend, and he also served as president of their congregation. Frank, you will be missed by all of us here today. I will think of you often with fond memories. May you rest in peace.
Good morning, cherished friends and family. I want to reflect a bit on behalf of my brothers Joel and Bill. I want to begin with a list of the very first words that came into my mind when I thought of my father, the very first reflections, the very first descriptions, the very first representations. Honest, genuine, selfless, loyal, intelligent, dependable, responsible, caring, reverent, humble, generous, principled, ethical, honorable, virtuous. All of these embody my father. All of these make up the very tapestry of his being. He lived his life built on pillars of ethics and honesty. He loved his parents, his wife, his children, his grandchildren, completely, absolutely, and without condition. As has been mentioned, he's had a long, successful career as a dedicated educator and guidance counselor for special needs students. He cared and supported his wife through years of medical issues that she had. He did so without complaint, without hesitation. He raised 3 sons with seemingly limitless love, support, guidance, and enlightenment. He had such love, admiration, and respect for his parents that one could only hope to emulate. He had such reverence and exaltation for the traditions, customs, heritage of family and Judaism. He was the silent, passive, reserved, composed source of strength, vigor, and structure of this family. Everything he did, every task he accomplished, every student he taught or advised, every person he loved, every wrong he made right, everything broke that he fixed, every ailment that he healed, he did without fanfare, without glory, without accolades, or without attention. The most extraordinary thing about my dad is how ordinary he appeared to live his life. Everything that he did was accomplished with such an unassuming ease, kindness, and thoughtfulness. That was his true brilliance. The cake without the frosting, the diamond without the shine, all substance. Indeed, nothing ordinary at all. I would like to share a few memories, amusing some seemingly mundane at the time, but so very influential to me. And some of this has been mentioned, at least with the rabbi, but the 2 times I can ever remember my dad swearing and saying the F word. 2 times. To know my dad, you knew that he didn't swear. That was my mom's job. She did that well, along with my Zadie. Anyway, first time I was probably 9 or 10 years old. I got bit by a dog. It was on our street near our apartment on Washtenaw. And I can remember he was trying to find the owner of this dog. And there was this cocky older teenager, perhaps he was in his early 20s, that was giving him a hard time. I can remember my dad vividly yelling at this guy and getting the information he needed from him about who the owner was. In that instance, my dad seemed 10 feet tall to me, and I was in awe. Second time, my very dear friend of over 40 years, Kevin, who's here, probably remembers this as he was present. It was in our basement of the house we lived on Estes Avenue. Our freezer, of all things, had defrosted. And there was water everywhere, not to mention thawing food. I can remember how angry my dad got, throwing F-bombs, and just how amusing it was to me that he was just so fired up and actually swearing, again, something he never did. I don't know if you remember that. You remember? Yeah, man. Amazing. His complete love affair with trains and anything railroad related. Very few individuals build an actual front of a train car in their basement. I know it seems like you would, but with working lights, sign, horn. Every chance he got, he talked about trains and the beauty he saw in them. When we were children to perhaps early adolescence, he would attend these monthly train fan or enthusiast meetings at a variety of downtown Chicago locations. If memory serves, it was particular to electric trains and cable cars. That was his true passion. I went with him often to these meetings on Friday night. I went with him, and he would often bribe me with a McDonald's milkshake to come with him. I think it was perhaps his way of trying to pass on his enthusiasm to me. Obviously for me, it was complete and utter boredom for 2 hours. But the truly special thing was not the meeting. It was not the McDonald's milkshake. It was the car ride to and from the meeting. Nobody knows these things right now. I felt like this was my private time with him as we discussed a variety of topics, listened to country music, and I reveled in his expertise of everything Chicago, as he was like a seasoned tour guide. He knew the neighborhoods, the streets, the directions, the buildings, the landmarks, and yes, where the best restrooms were located in downtown Chicago. I think we often joke that he would write a book about that. I can still remember the aroma of cocoa in the air as we passed the Blommer chocolate plant on 600 West Kinsey as we drove home from one of those train meetings. My dad did not like expressways. He preferred, when possible, to go local. What sights to see, what pearls of wisdom to imbibe, and what memories to have, all from such ordinary car rides back and forth to a place I really didn't even want to go to in the first place. In the 1980s, he worked part-time for a maternity store called Maternity Modes. They had numerous locations through Chicago and the suburbs. I would go to work with him on weekends, either making deliveries or filling orders in the warehouse they had on Devon and Rockwell at the time. Again, I felt like this was my private time with my dad. No one else was privy to. The ordinary deliveries we made to and from the stores around Chicago were priceless to me. We would talk, and most importantly, he would allow me to talk about whatever I had wanted. I can remember talking about school, Little League, food, baseball, politics at the time, how I disliked my brothers, and yes, even sex. He was open and honest and shared with me valuable information that at the time I don't believe a lot of fathers were doing. We would eat out at fast food restaurants and drink root beer or Werner's ginger ale. That was one of his favorite beverages. This is how I spent many ordinary weekend afternoons, not thinking very much about it at the time. The destination is not necessarily the most important part of the journey. It's how you get there. My dad used to say this all the time. The journey is the best part of the trip. He absolutely believed it and knew it to be one of life's truths. This is in part, I believe, one of the reasons he loved trains and the railroad. I can remember him talking for 30 years after about that wonderful and life-changing cross-country railroad trip that he took to California in 1983 for my cousin Jesse's bar mitzvah at the time, of which my cousin Louis was with him for that journey, and he often stated how wonderful it was to have you there with him. I can see now, as I reflect on those car rides that I had with my dad, what he meant by how you get there as being the most important part. He was absolutely right. My trips with him, again, not seemingly important to me at the time, were some of the most paramount times of my life journey. Today is indeed a destination for my dad, but his life journey, the directions he followed, the choices he made, the actions he took, the fellow travelers he affected and influenced along the way, were indeed the most important parts of his journey and expedition. His funeral is a destination, a train station along the way, but also the beginning of a new and wondrous journey, one that will be very like his last, nothing ordinary at all. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Those beautiful, beautiful tributes, descriptions. Leda hi reshit, uftirat tachlit hachaim kamasahim. Yehalachat tzmicha, v'shalav l'shalav. Birth is a beginning. Death is a destination. Life is a journey, a going and a growing from stage to stage, or Aaron, if you will, from train stop to train stop. And friends, as Aaron said, the good life and journey of Frank Gerber has reached a culmination, its conclusion, sadly. And yet his legacy, as you also beautifully described, remains. It is my honor now to call on our cantor, Cantor Dan Gale, for El Malay Rachamim, the memorial prayer. Please rise, everyone. I will read it first in English, and then Cantor Gale will chant it in Hebrew. El Malay Rachamim. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence among the holy and the pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of Franklin E. Gerber, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be God's possession, and may his repose be peace. And we say, Amen.
El Molei Rachamim Shocheinu v'meromim Hametzei menucha nechuvona tachat Kanfei Ashechina B'malot kedoshim B'malot kedoshim Kedoshim Tehorim Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Ephraim ben Yitzchak v'Rachel Shehaloch Li'olamu B'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchatu Ana Yana Ana Baal Harachamim הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור ביצור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר אמן.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Waldheim Cemetery in Forest Park. The family will be returning here from following the interment till 6 p.m. and then tomorrow from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Memorial contributions to Ezra Habonim, the Niles Township Jewish Congregation, would be appreciated. For those of you who are online, all that information is on our website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing many of the cars with a flag that will be affixed to the top portion of your car. We'll have a car in the back of the funeral procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own personal safety, I strongly recommend using a horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. And please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. The following people have been asked to serve as pallbearers. When I call your name, please stand next to Mr. Gerber's casket. Mr. Ephraim Rabin, Mr. Frank Sachs, Mr. Louis Rabin, Mr. Tim Williams, Mr. Kevin Garfinkel, and Mr. Steve Parker. This time I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place as we escort the casket of Mr. Franklin E. Gerber from the chapel. Then you may return to your cars.